much for joining us for Slate School's webinar about tools for nurturing creativity in children. We are thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Jennifer Staple-Clark, and I'm part of a team working to create Slate School, which is a 501c3 nonprofit nature-based elementary school in North Haven, Connecticut that we're working to open in fall 2018. I will start by very briefly introducing you to Slate School, review the webinar logistics, and then we will hear from our expert panelists. Slate School cultivates creativity, fosters ingenuity, and inspires a deep passion for lifelong learning and discovery. And Slate School's mission and priority is that each child's innate and natural love for learning be nurtured and enabled to grow and flourish. And that's much of what we will be discussing today in this webinar. Slate School will be sited on 25 acres surrounded by natural resources in North Haven, including woods, meadows, and organic gardens. And Slate School will also develop and cultivate a nature conservancy, preserving most of the land in its raw and natural state. The grounds will be free of pesticides and fertilizers, and all of the buildings will also be free of formaldehydes, VOCs, and other toxic chemicals, and therefore will become one of the most environmentally friendly schools in the country. Moving on to the webinar logistics for today, we're so delighted to have all of you with us here today. This is the first in our education series webinar. We'll have our next webinar on October 3rd about careers in education thinking outside of the box, and we'll be scheduling additional webinars throughout many months to come about various topics within education and innovation. We have 6 incredible panelists here with us today, and they have a wealth of expertise to share with you during this next hour. Each of our panelists will start by giving a 2-minute introduction about themselves, their current role, and their key guidance and advice about nurturing creativity in children. And then we will dedicate the remaining time to your questions and answers. And we received many stellar questions already from you, our audience, by Monday's question submission deadline, and we selected the most common and most thoughtful questions to ask our panelists today. We also invite you to submit additional questions in the text box on the left of your webinar screen, and then we'll select additional questions today to ask the panelists as well. We will proceed now with having each of our panelists introduce themselves in alphabetical order. I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, Jane Aronson. Jane, please begin by introducing yourself, your background and current role, and please share your key guidance and advice regarding nurturing creativity in children.
I was trained as a teacher to start out in my youth, and then I went to medical school at 31 and practiced starting in the early years of the 80s and became an HIV physician. So I did HIV medicine for 20 years, but, you know, my interest in education is really something that started early in my life as a school teacher and then continued as a pediatrician. Much of the practice of pediatrics is about psychosocial support and developmental evaluations of children, and much of that really is the focus of education. And now I run a foundation. It's 20 years old, Worldwide Orphans, which, to make a very long story short, after 20 years, is really focused on early childhood development from 2 points of view, from a play context and also as a workforce development to teach adults everything they can possibly know about early childhood development so that they can help and enhance play in their daily lives. And these are kids who are at risk, vulnerable, and orphan children. I think that's all I'll say for now. I love education, and I love Jenny's school. Slate School is a very beautiful and wonderful philosophical concept, and I think it is quite aligned with the philosophical, the philosophical basis of Worldwide Orphans Foundation and actually me and my personality. I'm done.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jane. And Tovah, Klein, please also introduce yourself, your background and current role, and share your key guidance about nurturing creativity in children.
Well, I am, for the last 20-something years, have been the director of the Barnard College Center for Toddler Development, and I'm a faculty member in psychology. My background is clinical psychology. I feel like I practice in the arena of developmental psychology and really trying to understand the foundations of what gives children a base so that they can thrive. I I most recently wrote a book called How Toddlers Thrive, which pulls together the research I've done over the years and our understanding of young children to really, I hope, help parents and educators see the toddler world and the world of children under the age of 5 through the eyes of young children, because their world is so different than ours. And we spend a good amount of our time doing research on play, why children play, how they play, and particularly how they process emotions through the kind of early play that 2- and 3-year-olds do. And more recently, we've actually been interviewing parents about the conceptions of play to understand better how parents are thinking in this era of education pressures, when we know that play is so important. My main advice is for parents and educators to really give young children a space where they can play on their own terms, making their own choices and just driving themselves with their curiosity, which they innately have, and I think that's what the Slate School is going to be about, so that they can play for themselves and make discoveries for themselves and continue to both enjoy and challenge themselves through play.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tovah. And Sylvia Martinez, please introduce yourself as well.
My name is Colby Martinez. I'm really happy to be here today. I agree with everything that everyone has said. In my career, I've been a lot of things: an electrical engineer. I worked in aerospace. I've been a video game designer and programmer, a software publishing executive. I've run an educational nonprofit. And I recently wrote a book called Invent to Learn, Making, Tinkering, and Engineering in the Classroom. And it's been called the Bible of the Classroom Maker Movement. So now I work with schools around the world who are transforming their own spaces and thinking about, learning methodologies that really can offer students creative opportunities in all subjects, especially using modern technology like robotics and programming and 3D printing and microcontrollers. So, I really believe that creativity can be learned and especially nurtured, but I think the opposite is true. We can drill kids and bore kids into a place where they just lose their own abilities to be creative. And I really do think that this kind of creative learning is possible in schools and out of schools, and in the arts, of course, but also in STEM subjects, in science and technology and engineering and math. And so in our book, we said there are 4 elements needed to create this kind of creative learning environment. A good prompt, appropriate materials, sufficient time, and a supportive culture. And just to focus on one right now, time. I think time is essential for creativity. Time for thought, for design, for invention, for reflection, to just take a deep breath. And this doesn't happen enough in schools. We rush kids from one thing to the next, and we, ring bells and blame them for having a short attention span. And we rush teachers too. American teachers have the least amount of prep time, collaboration time, professional development time for any teachers around the world. But I think the good news is we can fix this. So that's all I'll say for now. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And Laura Meyers, please also introduce yourself and share your key guidance.
Hi, I'm Laura Meyers, and I am really excited to be here. I, like Sylvia, agree with everything that everyone's saying, and I'm excited to be here and chime in on this conversation. I'm a former elementary teacher. I taught in what was classified as an inner-city school for several years, and then to pursue my doctorate so that I could support students in developing skills as pre-service teachers to then go on and work in their own classrooms. I'm currently a professor at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am the coordinator of one of our brand new graduate programs. It's a Master's of Arts in Creative and Innovative Education. We call it MACE for short. And we just kicked that program off this past spring. Some of my interest has been in this love for pushing the envelope and thinking outside the box, especially with the arts. And so my area that I like to tinker in is in the local independent film and theater industry here in Atlanta, and I've been working with my own company, Hats and Heels, as well as other companies like Critical Crop Top, and using social justice as a focal point and using drama as well as visual arts to prompt conversations. My advice for nurturing creativity in children would be to be a creative yourself and make time to create and develop and be a maker and a tinkerer and share those experiences with your students and your children, and whether they're successes or failures, especially share the failures and the mistakes in problem solving.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura. And our fifth panelist, Katherine Riske, please also introduce yourself and share your guidance.
Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting us. I want to take everybody out for coffee. I'm so impressed with everyone's bio. It sounds like we all share sort of an unconventional path to education. I, too, share that in common with the panel. So I am currently associate head of Birches School. This is an independent K-8 nature-based school in Lincoln, Massachusetts. I'm really excited to learn more about SLATE in that respect. And I teach science here. The route that brought me here is definitely indirect. For all intents and purposes, I was on the path of a research scientist. I received my PhD in biomedical science, and my graduate work was molecular in focus. And after grad school, I did my postdoc, pretty traditional trajectory. I focused on identifying genes that were involved in regulating sleep and looking at the actual timing of sleep. And while I was at Brandeis, I had my first child, and I sort of credit that experience to a personal awakening. My priorities definitely began to shift, as they do when you have children. I became more and more fascinated with the process of his learning and watching his sense of this innate sense of investigation and curiosity. And it was through watching him that explore his world and his environment that I began to allow myself to think more openly and creatively about my own career. And in fact, I think that being open, that sense of openness is, if not the key, it is one of the essential keys to thinking creatively and being a creative person in terms of output. My greatest lesson or advice and my continued goal as a science teacher is to create an environment that allows for my students to remain open. And so what does that look like or sound like? I constantly challenge myself to be open and self-reflective, and so I push that kind of environment as the place for our students to be open to risk-taking and open to making connections between seemingly disparate disciplines and concepts, and open to new experiences. So, and I also want to echo open to time, because that one of the panelists mentioned being less restricted by time and allowing creativity, and I think that's a key ingredient as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Katherine. And Jenna, if you can also please introduce yourself and also share your guidance.
Sure. I'm hard to follow all of that already, and I'm just so inspired to be one of the panelists with these 5 incredible women. So I will briefly introduce myself and try to follow that. So I'm Jana Dell, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Ubuntu Education Fund. And Ubuntu's model provides vulnerable children with comprehensive support from cradle to career. Our ultimate goal is to ensure stable health and income for families in disadvantaged communities in South Africa. And one of the ways that we do this is through our early childhood education initiatives that are built around play-based learning. So I've been with Ubuntu for 15 years, and I lived in South Africa working in low-income communities for 11 of those years. And in my role, I'm responsible for creating the program strategy and leading the development of our initiatives and documenting and evaluating our successes and our challenges. And my advice when it comes to nurturing creativity in children is everything that everybody shared, but also just to add on to that, the reality is sometimes I think we over-engineer our ideas on how to nurture creativity. As grown-ups, we're inhibited, right? We judge and we fear being judged, but children are free from this burden, and that's an advantage that educators and parents should seize. Creativity is about letting children explore and create and act out what they see and discover, and we need to engage children and let them guide our play, and children who help guide their own learning feel free and safe from what I've seen. And I work in a very disadvantaged setting, and I can tell you that creativity is not relative to income. All children are extremely creative as long as they feel safe and have food and feel loved. And I think that creativity thrives when other needs are met. So a hungry child might be concentrating a lot on food and a sick child on how they feel. But if we provide comprehensive support for children, it creates that stable launching pad that lets children's minds fly.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jana. And thank you to all of our incredible panelists. As you heard, all of them have a wealth of expertise and guidance to share with you today. Now we will proceed with the question and answer session. As I had mentioned, we received questions in advance from you, our audience members. And if you have additional questions, please post them in the text box on the left of your webinar screen, and we will add those to the queue today as well. Our first question is for Tovah. How does pretend play impact creativity in toddlers?
Wow, this is such a big question, but such an important question, too, because pretend play is what toddlers and young children basically would spend their life doing when given the opportunity to do so. And I think the various panelists sort of touched on this, but Jana, and particularly just now, in saying that when we give children spaces where they can be safe, they will really play. And the reason that pretend play is so important is that it's an arena for their already innate curiosity, which is what spurs creativity. It allows them to explore on their own terms. It's not adult-defined terms, but the child can try on roles. They can be, strong. They can be babies. They can decide what they want to be. They can also practice in the adult world. Toddlers watch us, and they want to kind of do what the big world does. They can figure out what they like, what they dislike through that pretend play. But really importantly, they process emotions. So if it's scary going to the doctor, but you get to be the doctor to your teddy bear or to other people in the room, it gives you a sense of agency and calm. I'm in control. You can be a lion and you can express your fear or your anger. So it also gives them a lot of flexibility because there's not any one right or wrong way to play and pretend play, but it gives them a world to make decisions and choices that's really spurred on by pleasure. And then the last piece I'll touch on is that pretend play is what supports their imagination because possibilities are endless in a toddler's pretend world. They can create any beginning or ending that they want, and the play can morph over time. And then children, certainly by the older 3 and 4-year-olds going into 5-year-olds, are doing a lot of social interaction through the pretend play. So they're learning how to both take care of themselves and become their own person, but also how to relate to others and develop the kind of kindness and empathy that we hope children around the world will gain. So they're getting all of these pieces because the arena of pretend play is so open-ended if they're safe and if they're provided with an environment to do that.
Terrific. Thank you, Tovah. And Jana, how do you suggest facilitating pretend play for young children?
I think Tovah covered actually a lot of it, but, just in terms of children creating these scenarios based on what they see, play allows them to act it out, right? So pretending is flexible and comfortable and an experimental way to experience a lot of the confusing things around them. They're in control, but what I've observed is that it gives them, they like the framework that the real world provides, but when they get to play, they can break free by flying or breathing fire or pretending to sleep or be the doctor, as Tovah said. So it's effective in trying on reality. But in terms of what we can do, we have to help facilitate play by giving them that space, both physically and emotionally, to do it. And I really believe that less is more. And we need to provide some tools for children, but to not overdo it. So not over-structuring and over-scheduling children and giving them the time. And I know this has already been said, but it's so important, giving them the time to explore. It's about letting children have free time with some tools. Maybe it's you don't even really need tools, but a basket of old clothes, or letting children, as a parent, take all the cushions off the couch and make those forts and those caves. And then, of course, helping to facilitate play by getting them outside and in the mud and climb trees and use the environment around them, but simplifying it. So many times I think we've all heard the story about the child that ends up loving the box that the toy came in way more than the toy itself. But I think about that word facilitate, and we have to remember that we're there to provide the support and even engage in the play, but we really need to take our cues from children. And if we listen to our children, we understand how important it is. And how many times have we all been in a situation where we've been engaging in play and we have an idea? The child's pretending to be a pirate and is sailing the sea and the sky, and we interrupt and say, oh, let's sail on the water now. And we add that element, and the child looks at you like you're crazy. They reject that idea, and they're rejecting your lack of imagination. We need to let children lead, and that's really the key to that facilitation, and we need to focus on that first.
Terrific. Thank you, Jana. And Sylvia, what is the best way to inspire children to be innovative and inventive? And are there differences for younger and older children?
Well, gosh, again, everything everybody said is so right. I think that when you're with children, you have to like them. You have to be interested in them. You have to talk to them. And I mentioned time, and someone else mentioned agency. I think part of this is having confidence in yourself and that your ideas are good and valuable. Piaget says that the role of the teacher is not to correct children from the outside, but to create the conditions for children to correct themselves from the inside. And in school, we do a lot of telling kids that they're wrong, and we just sort of expect them to accept this, and we kind of tamp down their agency. And I think we have to be a lot more where we say yes to kids. And this is, goes right into the next question, the difference between younger and older kids. I think it's less than people think. When we look at young kids, we say, oh, look at them playing in the sandbox. They're little engineers. Isn't that cute? They're learning about, cause and effect and stability. And then somewhere around like 3rd, 4th grade, we kind of lose the plot and we start to say play is frivolous. We have to get serious. Kids have to learn to write research reports. Alfie Kohn calls it the Bugatti curriculum, the better get used to it curriculum. We write research reports in 3rd grade because in 4th grade we're going to have to, and it's because in 5th grade we're going to have to. And we have to focus on the kids, who the kids are right now. And that includes play. Play has a bad name in school. And maybe it's better to call it tinkering, because that's the way that real scientists work. Real scientists mess around with ideas and tinker and play with ideas. And we've got to figure out how to make that play work in schools. And, it is the real world. It's not fooling around. It is the way real scientists work. So I think that the difference between young children and older children should actually be less.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And Laura, what are good phrases of encouragement for when children are creating art? For example, saying that their painting looks beautiful may seem insincere.
That's really a powerful question, because absolutely we want to make sure that as adults we're really honoring what the students are seeing and noticing within their own work. I think that first it's more important to put the spotlight on the child, on the creator, on the artist, and ask questions that support the students in sharing their voice. So letting them talk about and basically interpret their own work for you, and then repeating that back to them, what they're saying and what they're noticing. A lot of times I hear some of my students and educators, and I'm certainly guilty of this, starting a compliment with, "Oh, I really like X, Y, and Z about your work." And I would recommend straying from the I and focusing on the you, and asking them what they find valuable and interesting about their work. You really have to be specific with what you notice regarding their work so that it doesn't come across as a generic compliment that you would give to just any student. So maybe focusing on their work ethic, their effort that they've put into it. Notice kind of restating facts. I know you've been working diligently for X amount of time. You chose these colors within the painting that you were making. Tell me more about that. And there's a book that I found really helpful by Peter Johnston called Choice Words, and that might be a good resource. It helps break down some specific phrases of encouragement, ways of conversing with young people, really across all ages.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And Jane, the next question is for you. How do you instill creativity in students in an inner-city charter school environment with limited funds and no art budget, and with only 30 minutes of visual arts time per week?
Yeah, I can't answer that question. I'm going to be a little bit of a naughty child right now and be a little playful and say that I think that I had the benefit of listening to everybody, and, what WWO does with play is a little bit off the beaten track, if you will, because what we're doing is we're really teaching adults about play, and we're not a parenting organization where we hire individuals who are undereducated and basically not really all that knowledgeable about play, and likely never played themselves, and they're from very poor backgrounds, and both abroad and in the U.S. And we love people who are just interested in children, and then we provide them with a curriculum, early childhood development curriculum, gradually over time, and we have them volunteer for our toy library, which then
Oh, Jane, I think we lost you for a moment. Jane?
Sorry, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Okay, we have you now.
Okay, so I don't know where I cut off, but
Toy library.
okay, so we're training adults, and they become aficionados of play and of knowing children. So because I think our final goal in our intervention and our use of play actually is to try to change trauma, to treat and heal both adults and children in a community where there's usually a lot of trauma, and families have been in disarray for generations. And so then we're trying to create a workforce development tool and help people become something new and different around understanding how children think and feel, lessening the mystery, and improving the way in which children are respected and loved.
Terrific. Thank you, Jane. And Laura, do you have additional thoughts on this question about instilling creativity in students in an inner-city charter school environment, and also especially regarding visual arts?
Yes, I think that it's a popular question. How do we do more with less? And I think it's really difficult to go all out, or it can be, but at the same time with limited funds or no art budget within short amounts of time, those are just one of many constraints that we have as educators. And so I would say kind of figuring out problem solving with working within those constraints can make it even more of a creative opportunity for the educator and children alike. So some of the things that I've seen take place is that I collaborated with an art teacher at an elementary school that had, oh my goodness, close to 1,000 students, and there was maybe 50 cents per student for the entire school year. And so she's pretty clever when it comes to choosing materials that can be repurposed or reused. So she, for example, uses clay a lot because you can ball it up and reuse it. You don't have to fire it. She also focuses on working with partners or working in small groups on projects, which really supports that skill set of what it means to collaborate, what it means to problem solve, what it means to communicate. So you're getting into a lot of literacy skill development at the same time. And other things directions I've gone in lately, even if funding is there, is repurposing found objects or recyclables. For example, I know that I've collected recycled paper and then used that to make torn art murals. You could even think about redefining or expanding what visual art is to you as an educator, if you haven't already, and consider design. And so, for example, if you were exploring architecture, you could certainly share a slideshow of photos, perhaps, or bring in books from the library of different architectural design, and then focus on playing with and tinkering with dimension and height and posing a problem to students with all of these recycled boxes and other materials that you've brought in that they work together to construct, quote unquote, their building. So it just I think it depends on your space and, kind of your own creativity as an educator, but there's always a way around it. I caution people not to let limited funds and short time periods deter them.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And Tovah, what are examples of ways that parents and teachers interact with toddlers which they feel to be effective, but which are actually detrimental to a child, and how can this be avoided?
It's an interesting question. I love it. I actually spend a good amount of time in my book talking about it. But to keep the answer sort of succinct, I think there's a number of things. One is parents and educators, too, see young children and want to make them happy, right? There's this idea that children should be happy. They should be joyful. And, of course, that's true no matter where a child is born or grows up or lives, and certainly we should respect every child for who they are. But the mistake of that is not understanding that they have a whole range of emotions, from, happy to anger to fear to pride. They're all there. And so we have to give children room to express all those emotions. And like some other people have said, I really stick to a philosophy of less is more. So, parents often think if they have the means that the more toys or the more books or the more materials they have, the better. And it's, it's from a good place in their heart. But children actually do better when they're, again, given space and adults can kind of back off. And even a few materials, open-ended materials, some people have said it, boxes and recycled materials are wonderful for children to create and be creative with. And I think one of the other places that, parents often feel pressured, particularly in this era, that children need to be learning all the time. And what they don't understand is that, particularly for young children, this certainly goes across ages, but young children are learning all the time. Everything they're doing and touching and playing with, whether it's pretend or trying to figure out how something works or interacting with people, they're learning, and they don't need us to drive it, which means that we don't need to correct them. Children figure things out by making mistakes, trying to build with blocks and it falls down. And then they have to think, how do I rebuild this? Or do I even want to rebuild this? Maybe I don't. And so parents and I think teachers are quick to jump in and correct children or show them the right way, which then inadvertently works against the child saying, hey, I have ideas and I can act on my ideas, and how does this work, which gives them a sense of I can figure it out. And then I think the final piece I'll say is that along with that goes, I think, a high need for control that adults often have with children. And I see that a lot in the desire to praise children, which is really a form of directing or controlling them, right? I'm going to keep telling you this is good, so you'll keep doing it. And it really clamps down on children making choices for themselves because they're always thinking, is mommy going to be happy? Is daddy going to be happy? Is the teacher going to be happy? As opposed to having some guidelines and then letting the children figure it out on their own. So I think some of it is backing off and really trusting that for the most part, children can create and play and do things that are learning and are in their best interest, whether it's, a place with a lot of material or not, but that we have to trust children to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Katherine, how can teachers display examples or samples of student creativity in a way that is nurturing rather than competitive? And how do you prevent signaling that there are right or wrong ways to be creative?
Oh, this is a great question. I feel like when output is cookie cutter and each student sort of has this sense that they need to fit into a correct or a quote-unquote right format, that for some that may feel comforting, and others that's quite stifling. And what we do in science here is to scaffold several options for output with the hope that we're able to assess each student's understanding of a given topic by asking them to present their understanding in different forms. So what does that look like? For a recent science assignment, we asked students to choose from 3 options to show their understanding. And this is when they learned about several careers in marine science, and we gave them different options for showing their learning. And then the output is going to be actually to teach the rest of the class about their new expertise. And so they can choose between, for this particular assignment, I think it was a PowerPoint presentation or a 3D artwork that included an artist statement or a short essay. In this case, our students are working in small teams and groups. I know another person on the panel mentioned that as being really key, and we really agree with that, allowing them to work together and become experts is really important for expressing themselves, and that team learning allows just for creativity. There isn't one correct way. There's an input from several different perspectives. And finally, they're not comparing their work to one another because they've sort of stepped into this teacher role where they have an individualized project that they've so thoroughly made their own. And when they go to present their work, the output is original. We hope that they don't have a competitive or one-size-fits-all format because it's scaffolded in such a way that there is flexibility and openness for the way that they want to express themselves. So that's the goal of having their work be displayed in a way that doesn't give them a sense that there is one way or one right way.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Katherine. And a question for Jana. How should teachers involve and include family members and members of the learning community into a classroom that welcomes creativity?
I like this question. As a mom of 2 little boys, I always want to be involved in my children's classroom. So I always take it from that perspective to start. It helps me to understand where they spend most of their day, right? connects us to our children and is essential for building those bonds we need. And I love this question because it's not about just involving family members in the classroom, but it's about the creativity piece, and that's so key. So many schools just in general provide opportunities for parents to come and meet the teacher and come to curriculum morning or a structured Mother's Day event. But it's important to find ways to engage parents so that they can better understand play and spend time with their child in a more meaningful way. But I think a lot of it starts with education, and Jane touched on this, and we do a lot of this type of adult education as well. In my experience, both professionally and personally, parents are either so focused on academics or don't feel comfortable engaging in play or don't even know how to engage. So something that we do is we hold weekly workshops for parents at Ubuntu in South Africa. We hold weekly workshops for parents so that we can increase their understanding of play and just the importance around it. And then we offer a series of events on a monthly basis, and we welcome parents to come in and allow for them to engage in the creative aspect of the classroom environment with the child. So getting muddy with their child, and everybody has a garden plot, and they all work together, and it's their plot, and they get to take the food home, so they're really working with their child and being creative. And somebody mentioned Play-Doh. We make a ton of Play-Doh, but the parents are doing it too and building towers with them. And at the same time they're doing that, they're also building their knowledge on how to best engage in child-led play through working with their children and then attending workshops as well. And, I think that what we've seen is once parents let their guard down, we see just a complete shift in behavior. We see parents let go and play and just have fun. And it's so important for us as grown-ups, like Jane said, to have that time too. It helps us with our own creativity. So it's about giving parents opportunities to engage in meaningful, creative ways and educating them and giving them that voice and space to express themselves freely too.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jana. And Jane, what is the best way to respond when a child is concerned that they're writing or drawing incorrectly?
Oh, well, that's funny. Because that's something I know so well from my work abroad. I think Jenna would definitely, right, Jenna, you would know about this, where the bent on art and any creativity in countries where there's so much poverty is to draw the same thing. So when I adopted my older son from Ethiopia in 2004, a lot of the drawings that came to me from the orphanage were all pictures that had been sort of set up on the wall. And then all the kids were told to draw the same thing. And I think that really was the way it was when I was growing up as a child. I was born in 1951, and, we drew the same things because there was, not that people were anti-creative. It's an interesting thing. It's my philosophical bent now that I don't think anyone was against creativity. I think they were probably afraid of it and wanted competency from kids. And thus the difference between early childhood education, which was so heavy laden with memory tasks, and not the discovery and curiosity that we love and adore today. But I think there's been shifts and cycles of that throughout history, actually. So I think it's a really easy thing. I'm sure everyone here has a comment here that clearly, we want children to feel comfortable about whatever they create. And it's like toilet training, though. Just don't go be too zealous about how great, it was that they were near the toilet, Be reasonable about how effusive you get about any kind of moment for children. You have to kind of make a balance on it. Some people just go crazy. I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but I think it's very funny how people just get so carried away with praising kids. And I think, Tovah, you said something to that effect, that, it's not really the praising that really matters, actually, finally. It's keeping it, sort of part of the feeling and the gestalt of the environment and what kids are doing and the excitement and, yeah, that's it.
That's terrific. Thank you, Jane. And Laura, what are your suggestions to encourage children to take creative risks, and how do you suggest responding to children when they say they're not good at something?
This is a really thoughtful question. I think it makes me think of some of the things that maybe Katherine was talking about earlier with it really boils down to the type of community that you're building within your classroom or where children are learning with you, and so that developing that environment for openness and self-reflection, but coaching students or scaffolding their thinking to recognize their strengths and to celebrate that. I think by offering choices for ways of creating and opportunities to tinker and use different materials would help students and children in celebrating the process and not necessarily so much focus on the end product. A lot of times we don't really celebrate the failing and the making of mistakes, or not even looking at it as mistakes in some cases, but just changing our mind and how we wanted to approach something. And so providing that, I would say safe space, but I don't know that there's ever really a, quote-unquote safe space. But maybe within that community you come up with some agreeables, and that helps students feel recognized and heard and seen. Becky Bailey has a text. It's called Conscious Discipline. There's a chapter there about encouragement. And I know that people are saying, be careful with praise, and absolutely. We don't want to give just blanket praise just for the sake of having someone's voice going, and we want to be intentional and deliberate. And so what she recommends within this idea of encouraging a child who may be struggling with not seeing their strengths or feeling like they want to be vulnerable within this creative experience. It's kind of good to just take a practice. I hear you, and I have felt that way too. Let them know we're all in this together.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Laura. Sylvia, what is the best way for educators to reinvent their teaching approach to be project and inquiry-based? And is this approach right for all children?
I think that, this project and inquiry-based learning, it's not impossible to do. And I think that teachers learn to do it by learning that way and then being a supportive environment that lets them teach that way. When we do professional development, we ask teachers to take off their teacher hats and suspend their disbelief and to feel what it feels like to be frustrated and then feel like how elated you get when you make something work. And sometimes they get mad at us. They're like, why don't you just give me the handout? Why did you make me do this? And then we start talking about it. Well, are your reactions just like what some of your students are feeling? What does this look like in a classroom? How do you allow a little bit of frustration, but not like mean bash your head against the wall frustration? You have to feel something to know how to make it work. And, not everything is going to work for all students, but I think there's a lot of one way going on. It's sort of like there's a whole alphabet of things we could do for students, and right now we do a lot of A and saying, we're only going to do B. Well, that's not the answer either. What about C and D and Z? And I think teachers have to be masters of this improv of feeling the situation, of listening to kids. Teaching is about listening, not about talking. And those skills have to be on call, and those skills have to be practiced. You can't just hand teachers a book and say, okay, go do inquiry-based. It takes time to develop these kind of professional skills.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And Laura, what strategies do you advise to empower K-12 students to identify problems and then to create solutions?
Well, I think everything that Sylvia just said could be repeated to answer this question. I think you really do have to really listen more and talk less and create more opportunities for students to be able to talk with one another and share ideas and brainstorm. I think that could be a hard role to transition into if you have not been approaching practice in that way. But a strategy that I've really enjoyed using lately has been problem scoping with literature, and that's been a really fun way for students to work together to identify problems that the characters are encountering and kind of making a list of what problems they noticed within a book, and then kind of scoping those problems by considering the needs of the characters or the context or the constraints imposed by the story itself, and then brainstorming the solution, even designing maybe prototype. And throughout that process, you're getting feedback from either a partner or small group setting, or if working independently, you would still want to make sure to create that opportunity for children to talk with one another so that they can work towards improving their designs, and then sharing that final solution that they came up with and that they're suggesting would work. And then just kind of reflecting on that with the class, whether that's reflecting orally or in a written format. I mean, there's lots of different ways you could approach it. But again, it's that process, I think, more so than the end product. I mean, the end product guides, how we deviate from the current process into a new direction, of course. But I think just considering how we got from point A to point B to point C is really important, and thinking about those what-ifs within problem solving, kind of chunking it in order to tackle the problems that the characters are going through, and then transitioning that to how we identify problems in the world around us, whether that's in our community, locally, globally, and what we go through maybe personally, more on a personal level. Because there's lots of opportunities for designing service learning types of projects that could be inquiry-based in a way that we work with our community and get to know our community, bring in parents and families, but also those folks that are running various businesses and nonprofits and other organizations that could partner with our classroom or with various groups of students in unique capacities for problem solving on maybe a different level. Any way you can bring the real world in, or at least scaffold your way towards that, I think makes it that much more meaningful to the students as well as to the educator and to the community. It becomes this cyclical giving back and rethinking and being in the moment of developing these strong, productive, thoughtful citizens that are capable of being creative and problem solving.
Fantastic. Actually, a great question for you. How should teachers and families ensure that they select children's books which inspire creativity instead of stifling or constraining children? What are some of your favorite books for elementary children?
One of the books that I just used with a group on the elementary level, but I would say you could use it with older students as well. It's a picture book, but I use picture books across all age brackets. It's called The Librarian of Basra, and it's based on a true story in Iraq, and it's a librarian is working to problem solve, getting the books out of the library before it's possibly bombed, and how is she going to do that? How can she hide books, and why would that be problematic? It's a really powerful picture book. And some of the other books that I enjoy using, gosh, there's so many. I'm turning around now and looking on my shelves. There's another book that I think is a lot of fun that I keep out. It's called I Ain't Gonna Paint No More by Karen Beaumont. And it's one where a child is just painting all over himself. And it's this very rhythmic text, and the pictures are all black and white throughout unless it has to do with the paint. And it's a fun one because it's a child kind of, doing something that he's probably not going to be encouraged to do by an adult, and so kind of crossing some lines there. but just having a ball doing it. I think that's kind of a fun one that would spark some conversation. Peter Reynolds has a really great collection of books. The one that I use quite frequently is The Dot, and it focuses on a young child figuring out how to make his or her mark as an artist, and it's a very encouraging picture book, and I've used it again across age groups, but by the end of the story, this child who's figuring out how to paint and that her voice matters ends up passing along and this encouragement to a younger student who was asking and kind of looking up to her and admiring her artwork. And so that would be a great one to use. Another one, maybe you've heard of Not a Box, and that's a really cool one. It's part of a series. There's Not a Box. There's one about a stick, and basically it's this rabbit who's looking at a box, and it's literally just a square. But the images indicate that it's actually not a box. It's a pirate ship, or it's a rocket, or it's a et cetera, and it goes on, and so it's a really fun one. Those are some of my go-to pieces that I like using that then students can, I either use them because they might be a source of encouragement or affirmation, or maybe it's a good prompt, like I've used Not a Box and then provided materials, and then we've created our own and then the students fill in the blank, and they use a repetitive shape, but then redesign it across multiple illustrations. So literature can work in a lot of different ways, and it's interesting then what students will come up with to create. And then any picture book that involves collage, I love using picture books with the collage medium, and so because then that's something that students can then mimic in their own artwork, and just use old magazines and newspapers and construction paper and get old recycled wallpaper books and then create characters and settings and that type of thing, whether it's for their own illustration and picture book that they're designing, or if they're just creating a backdrop for a setting for a stop motion animation or something along those lines. So lots of connections and fun with any type of picture book.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Laura. And Katherine, how does nature lend itself to a creativity-focused classroom? What are your lessons learned for incorporating nature-based learning into an academically rigorous curriculum?
Yes, this is a great question. It speaks to our mission perfectly. How do we go about creating opportunities for open inquiry, those that allow students to feel invested in a personal quest for knowledge, and how do we incorporate nature into that fold? Science here at Birches, our goal is to have students feel open to debate how raw data or scientific information is collected, and in turn, how is that data interpreted in multiple ways? So when students are open to questioning, when they feel open to possibility, they're able to figure out for themselves what's important here. They're able to ask, A, what am I interested in knowing or learning, and where can I take this line of questioning? And B, how would I go about finding out more and pushing myself further? So I can give an example. Like in our nature journaling each week, we start out with sort of open prompts, and they can be things like, what do I notice when I look deeply at something? And the scaffolding there would be, we're all looking at the same item. So For example, a rock wall was a recent focus. What do I notice when I have different tools or materials to work with? When I have a pencil or a set of colored pencils or a set of watercolors at different visits to the same place, how do my observations change? What did I notice when I look at the colors of a rock with a new or more open perspective because of the tools that I have in front of me? This might spark an interest in lichen or a desire to learn more about symbiotic relationships, between fungi and algae. I don't really know where it's going to go. It might go to geology, but this gives a personal meaning to science, and it allows them to see their own investigation as the center to understanding a scientific problem. And there isn't, as I said before, there isn't a cookie-cutter answer. There's no right or standard response because of that open prompt. And nature just innately is the sense of openness and wonder. I mean, there's so many opportunities of questioning and learning, and for them to personalize it and decide where they want to go with it. I like their giving them that opportunity to choose which avenue to take. That's where I feel like I can spark creativity in science in that sense.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Katherine. And thank you to all of our phenomenal panelists for all of the guidance and expertise that you have shared with our audience today. This brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. Thank you so much.